Hey, hello, Alan.
Oh,
You all right?
yeah, good, thank you.
Hi, Alan. Nice to see you.
Hello, my dear, how are you?
I'm doing all right, thanks.
Jolly good. You've been flying much?
No, not since August,
All right.
but hopefully back in January.
Yes, good.
How about
Right.
you?
Yes, Sue, make sure you do.
Yeah, I've had
See
a
you.
couple
I'm
of
going to do,
flights.
Ross.
Can
I'm going on the Oakley trip tomorrow.
Oh, nice. I couldn't make it in the end, so I had to bow out.
Oh,
I do take it personally that you're not coming, so
I know. I'm so sorry.
my first trip and not there to support me.
never mind. Right, we're going to do a little bit of name that part. So, can anybody tell me what this is? I tell you what, look, what am I doing? Look, there, look, James can model it there, so you get an idea of the scale.
That's a clutch belt.
I would say it's an alternator belt.
Oh, well done, Alan.
Good, yeah. Look at the size of it. It's not big enough to go around those two pulleys, those lower and upper pulleys.
not.
So, but also look at the. Can you see the shape of it? Now it has got teeth, but the teeth don't actually run around any gears. It's often commonly known as a V belt because if you look at the profile of it, I get a good shot of it like that. It's in like a bit of a V shape. It's narrow at one side and wider at the other, and that's where it's each side of that that grips the pulleys that turns it. So around the engine flywheel and around the alternator. I don't actually have an alternator spare one to show. But yep, there's a classic alternator belt off of probably the R22. Actually, yeah, so probably the R22 one by the looks of it, by the size of it.
It's a confirmation it does work with an elastic band.
Yeah, well,
They were tight.
the alternator does. How about, therefore, one of these?
Now that looks more like.
Again, for scale. Don't forget how big or small James is.
Yeah, I'm not very big.
Right, clutch belt. Or clutch belt,
Yes,
pulley belt for the clutch.
Yes, it is. Yeah, that's right. Which helicopter?
D6B and R22 must be a Cabri.
Yes,
Yeah, I was
because
Cabri, but...
there's, just for comparison, there's an R22 drive belt and there's the Cabri drive belt. Now, you can see the circumference of them is very, very similar, isn't it?
Mm.
But the width of them is very different. Have a look at the width of them when you compare. But how many are there on an R22?
There's two of them.
There is, and so they kind of almost make up, if you will, the width of the Cabri G2 belt because they're basically the same engine. But the Cabri G2 belt is very different on the inside. I don't know if you can see that quite clearly. But there's, I've forgotten how many ribs there are. I have to count them now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 15, of course it is. 15 ribs. Whereas in an R22 belt, or an R44 belt as well, to be fair, there's only 2. This is where we often say that the R22 belt is almost like 2 alternator belts stuck together because this is a dual V belt, whereas this one is definitely multi-ribbed. That's usually what it's called, a multi-rib belt. Sometimes they're called polymer belts or poly belt, but yeah, multi-rib belt. Very good. So what are we looking for on these 3 belts? A, that they're actually there on the helicopters as necessary, but what are we looking for?
There's no splits.
Mm-hmm.
So
I suppose all the cogs are, well, you actually can't see all the cogs of it, can you?
No, that's right. I mean, the alternator belt, don't be deceived by the fact it looks like it's got teeth. There's only really, therefore it allows it to go around, if it needed to, a tight corner, so it can flex quite easily. So the strength of these belts is just in there, and the end of my fingertip is I don't know how clear that is on my phone at the moment, but it's the braiding inside the belt that really gives it its strength. So the nylon braided inside. The rubber is just where it grips, but the braiding is what stops it from actually snapping. And same with an R22 belt. You can just about see it there, that faint line. And the Cabri belt, very, very similar. It's right on the back edge of it. That's where the real strength of the belt is. So we would potentially alternate the belt. I mean, really, as you say, just looking for making sure it's got about the right sort of tension. It's not all loose and floppy, and it doesn't look like it's all coming apart. R22 belt. We often look at the back just to make sure that the pulley that runs in that groove is not pushing its way through the belt. So if there's a bit of a ridge on the back here, you know, distinct ridge, that's not a good sign because the belt's getting very weak. I mean, if I pinch it, you get an idea of what it might look like if there's a bit of a ridge in it like this. Yeah, so the pulley's literally almost pushing its way through, cutting the belt in half, which is not good news. And then on the inside, just checking that there's no sign of any splits in it at all. So that's reasonably straightforward. And the Cabri belt, very much similar, isn't it? But the Cabri belt's got some funny marks on the back of it. You see where it's sort of shiny around the middle there, look. It's even worn off some of the writing about the manufacturer and the size of the belts. So any Cabri pilots know why there's a bit of a rub mark on the back. Come on, all you Cabri G2 pilots.
What?
Silence. I'm just asking, why is there on the back of the drive belt from the lower pulley to the upper pulley, so the engine to the gearbox, why is there this kind of rubbed mark all the way around the belt on the back of it? Clearly something's been rubbing on it.
It's not a belt tensioner, is it?
No, but that's close, Ross, because when the belt is on the helicopter, so if James just sort of puts it more like a bit like kind of elongated the other way, excellent, that's it. Hey, to stop it from kind of flapping around a bit, there's these things just on the back, just slightly off. And when the belt's a bit slack, as it starts to rotate, they just rub a little bit. But when it's full tension, it's just pulled away slightly. So it almost guides to stop that belt from flapping too much and possibly jumping off the pulleys at the bottom or the top. So they're almost like a guide. And it's a piece of, it almost looks like old-fashioned Baker-like material, either side of that belt. It's adjusted just to keep it there in place and stop it from jumping around too much. Whereas, oddly enough, it doesn't really have that on the Robinson other than a grey bar near the back of the belt, but they barely touch. But even the Robinson belts, now if you show you a little bit closer, look, even they have a smooth area to them where it has rubbed on that guide. That's the one we often measure against our fingers to check how much tension there is on the belt. All right, pretty good. Any questions on that so far? So we've got
What's
extra.
it made of?
Extra participant.
We got an extra participant here with Ross. That's brilliant. What a combination, Alan, of rubber and, like I say, there's nylon braiding in them. But that's more or less the makeup of it. Simple as that. Not very complicated. One of the things we do look for in the Cabri belt is, I'll show you here. You can see where the ribs are starting to come off. Now, apparently, you're allowed to lose up to 10 centimetres of these, and I think a number as well, like 2 or 3 of them, just off the top of my head. But this was back in the early days of Echo Hotel. We got there's the other belt, but they got a little bit jumpy with it and decided at the time just to have it replaced. It just wasn't worth it. I wasn't comfortable with it, especially there. This one's off a Victor Hotel. That's a reasonable section just there, missing, but not unusual. Nothing too much. Occasionally, when you check the helicopter over, down the bottom area of the engine bay, you find a little ball of rubber, and it's the drive belt. Now, James doesn't look quite so impressed now. His face is like, what?
You're allowed to lose 10 centimeters.
Yeah. Okay, so
Can you sorry, show us the same on the R22? What the fail would look like?
No, I mean the R22 belt here was just replaced probably because they were off at the time, and it's a case of, well, they're getting a little bit warm, but you don't tend to get lumps missing off of these big fat ribbed belts like on an R22. They stretch too fast, so they go out of limits, so you can't tension them anymore, or you can't adjust the clutch mechanism, as it were, or they potentially get too worn, and you can see it almost trying to push through the belt. So this belt was probably, it could be that it's done its hours. I can't remember what they are. I think they're still 2,200. I'm just trying to remember why I've got this belt. I think it was because they were stretched. And I say it's one of those classics. Whilst it's all apart, yeah, I might as well change them for the sake of, well, I don't think how much they were, like £600 or something.
This is at the same time as the motor.
Don't know. This was. I've had this belt a long time, so I'm
okay,
trying to go
no.
back in history and trying to remember why it was changed. Don't know, but I say the 22 belts won't lose lumps like the Cabri belt will, or pieces of that ribbing. Okay, so in the bag, it shouldn't be actually too. No, it's not dirty. Oh yeah, thanks, Dave. I'm used to having somebody helping me.
And the hostess.
Wow, look at that.
What have we got there? Apart from an
That is-
expensive scrap piece of metal.
That's
Oh, it might be
connected.
grubby on the inside. Watch out.
Yes,
Yeah, he's going to get messy.
yeah.
What is that?
R22 clutch wheel.
Yeah, that's not quite what we call it, but you're on the right track. Very good.
A spread clutch.
Aha. That's what I got here.
Ah,
And that sits, it's not quite the right one, but that would sit, actually turn it around. It does sit in that housing. Oh gosh, trying to think which side it is now. No, I think it is in the other side. So it would fit in that sort of housing. So this is an upper. No.
Upper
sorry,
sheath bearing.
that's a lower one. That's not the upper one.
Oh, lower one, sorry.
Yes, I think that's the lower one.
It looks small, so I thought it was the upper.
Yeah, no. Well, the problem is they look very, very similar
How can you tell the difference?
difference.
because of the bolts. These are going through the flywheel on through the engine. And if you turn that one round, if I show you, if this is the one I think it is, it is. There's a little nick out of it just here, and yes,
Yeah,
it
so
might be there.
something
There might be
there.
another. There might be another spot round it. There was corrosion, and it was almost kind of semi-splitting apart. I think that was it, just there. Yeah, it's not very obvious, but just here, this
Yeah,
is
you
not the sort of
can
thing you'd
just about
easily
see it.
see on an inspection. But when it was, just there, you can see the split in it now. Just there, the metal is actually just starting to split apart, right, just there, which
Yeah,
means
can
probably.
actually see that, yeah.
Oh, that's good then. So, well, it wasn't good for me, but you can. This is off of his, and what's happened, we reckon, is that that's the lowest point on the pulley where the engine often stops. So it sits down the bottom. If we put the belt around it, imagine this the other way around. The belt's sitting in there, and it traps moisture in there. So if the helicopter's sat outside, it rains, it sits inside this area, and of course it's going to start corroding. Now this is, judging by the fact it's got the rough edge on it, they call this like a metallized pulley. So it's already had corrosion inhibitor on there, but it's still managed to corrode as a net result. That's normally what identifies it, if I remember rightly. So this is the one that's, one of the ones that's got that extra corrosion inhibitor on it. But if you leave them sitting outside for any length of time, that's the sort of thing. Now that is not easy to spot. Now this wasn't about to fail. This gets
The
picked
belt
up.
would kind of like hide it.
Well, sorry, Ross?
Yeah, the belt would kind of like hide that crack.
Yes. Yeah. When we're peering down, you can sort of see down this area past the clutch mechanism. You can see these areas of the pulley. And you're just generally looking to make sure it looks quite clean, shiny, no signs of any, corrosion, etc. in there. But you can't go and turn the engine over, so you can't pick up on every little bit, every little imperfection. But that's what the servicing's about. This is why the guys take the helicopters apart, and during these, 1 hour, 500-hour inspections, etc., they're looking at this stuff really closely, as you can tell. And hence, they found that little area.
That wouldn't, if that hadn't been detected, you'd gone flying like that, you might not have noticed anything.
You wouldn't notice it. No, you wouldn't notice it.
Mm.
And it probably would have been fine for, I don't know, maybe another 100, 200, 500 hours.
Yeah,
Who knows? But at some point, it's probably going to cause a problem.
yeah.
And of course, maintenance is all about preventative. And as soon as you find something like that, you can't just ignore it, can you?
Yeah, no, that's true.
Like a little nick just here as well. That could be where it's picked up a bit of rubbish just inside the belt. But yeah, no, there we are. We can feel this. Rub your finger around on there. Look,
Oh yeah, that is.
So the
that is
metal's
very
been-
pronounced.
Yeah, the metal's expanded there. So every time
Yeah.
that goes around, that's squishing that belt. So it's got another little, almost, I can almost get my nail in there, another little split inside it.
Yeah. Don't know if they can see that.
Possibly
Just
not.
right there.
No, you can see it.
You can see the imperfections, can't you?
Yeah.
So the good, like I said, the good news is that it's not solely reliant upon your inspection of the aircraft. You're looking for not necessarily more obvious things, but these sort of things you're going to struggle to pick up on. But the reassurance is there that that's what the maintenance program's for. If it's done properly, they pick up on it. And give me a big bill. Yes, so
Oh yeah, for the fun of it, why don't you just tell us how much each bit to replace? How much does it cost to replace that?
I'd rather not, because I'll probably have to just go off and cry.
Okay, it was that big, was it? All right.
Yeah, I mean, nothing in there's barely anything on here that's hundreds of pounds. It's usually always thousands. It's just crazy. It's
Right.
bonkers. I try to remember how much the Cabri belt was. It must have been, I don't know, 300, 400, 500, 600 pounds at least, I should think, as a minimum. These pulleys are usually about, is it a couple of grand, 2 or 3 grand, I think.
I can remember when you had to replace a piston housing on I think it was on an R22 engine, and it cost about £3,000. Is that right?
This one here.
I think that was it. Yeah,
Yeah, we're working our way down the table, getting to the expensive end.
yeah.
Yeah, I've had one cylinder.
Cylinder, that's it. Yeah.
Placed. That was now what was that on?
Probably goes back to Defi or
yes, I think it might have been Defy or something like that.
sorry, yeah.
One of those ones. Yeah, I mean, it's quite rare for us to have something like that done.
Yeah.
We've got tail rotor gearboxes. So you can actually see now a little bit more of it. So this is it's just a protective cover on there, but that's the drive shaft where the tail rotor sits on. If you pull that cover off, Jane. That's it.
Is it just?
Yeah, it should just slide off. There we go.
Yeah.
So there's one little hole. That's the bolt that passes through the tail rotor that creates that Delta 3 hinge. And then the bit you can't see inside the tail boom, the drive shaft that will look vaguely similar to this kind of thing. Up inside the tail boom, connects on with a flex coupling, so it's actually like that. It's better. And you can see this area here, the flex coupling, through that little sight glass on top of the tail boom. This was, oh yeah, look, no, so that was Victor Tail's drive belt. This was his tail rotor gearbox. Or was it? No, because that actually went back, if I remember rightly. So this is just an old one I had. Yeah, his tail rotor gearbox. There's nothing wrong with it, but it was 12 years because it sat on a shelf for 5 years.
What time
Crazy. Yeah, so a lot of aircraft parts, the clock starts ticking from the moment they're made. So if it sits on a shelf in a stores department somewhere, the clock's ticking, and these have got 12 years of life on them. So say the gearbox that was on our R22 hadn't done many hours and looked pretty damn new, as it were, but it sat on a shelf somewhere for about 5 years, I think it was. So as soon as it got 8 years old on the aircraft, it was time expired. Yes. Very nice. All right, how about, anybody want to have a go at telling me what that is?
Exhaust gas manifold.
It is. But off of which helicopter? For a bonus point.
I'll go for R22.
R44.
Indeed, it's a 44. How do you know? Apart from it's a 50-50.
It just looks big.
Yeah,
Too big to fit
yeah.
in an R22.
But also,
Or a
of course,
Cabri.
how many cylinders are there in an R22?
4.
4 cylinders.
Yeah.
And we've got 1, 2, but there's also an extra connection on here, which is going to go to the next
The
cylinder.
44 has 6, doesn't it?
That's right, yeah. So this is one bank, one side of an R44 and one piece. There's still another elbow to go around there to the next cylinder. Pretty good. But what's surprising, if well, if James picks it up, watch how easy it is to pick it up. It's incredibly light and quite flimsy. So we have to be quite careful when starting the R44s. If we overfuel them, we used to have an elbow somewhere. There might be. I've got loads more parts, but that's in the other room, in the cage room. What can happen is the excessive fuel sits inside these where it explodes and actually balloons these out and eventually bursts them. So you can explode the exhaust manifolds by over priming. So every time you hear an R44 start with a bang, potentially it's going to blow that apart, or the exhaust system itself, the exhaust box. It wrecks those. Doesn't seem to do it on the 22s. They're more sturdy, but the 44s it does.
More on Raven 2s?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, looking good. How about one of these?
So that'd be a Cabri Penistrum blade.
Yeah, number 7. Look at that. But if I get James to hold that a second, this is now you can finally see what they call like the tension torsion pack inside. Look, there's lots of strips of stainless steel that go up inside the blade, so that when that's clamped, it can actually twist, but provides that strength of the centrifugal force. So these blades are all twisting on that pack because they sit on two shims, two sort of guides around this area here, 2 bearings, I think they like to call them, but they're just plastic guides. Pretty cool, huh? So yeah, Alan, this was Mecca Hotel.
Yes, I
Alas,
remember.
in the early days, they still made these out of an alloy, and they would the anodizing wasn't thick enough to stop corrosion. They would corrode.
That was quite an expensive change. Or was it?
Well,
on the,
these are not too bad. These are only £1,000, but there's 7 of them a time.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, only
I
a
think we went
1,000.
through three sets. I think we went through
3 sets. 21,000.
Yes, until eventually it was the case of there might be a bit of a problem with it.
So you change one.
I think the 3rd set we got for free, and the third set I think was the ones that got the titanium root around them now. So they've made this root around titanium because the rest of this is composite.
Yeah, you can feel that.
Yeah. So really good.
Paul, if you change one, do you have to change all of them?
No, not necessarily. Although they are matched back at the factory, so they weigh them to find the ones that are the closest weight. So there's less balancing to do of them. And I've seen them do that. Literally just put them on a scale. Oh, that's that much. Oh, that one's that much. Oh, that can go with that one. And then finally make a pack of 7 of them that are all very, very similar.
Right.
So a really good Cabri question is, I don't know if you can see it. Can you see these tiny little holes? There's a hole there. There. There should be probably one.
Yeah,
as
you
well.
can.
Hey, Sophie.
Hello. Sorry, I'm at the office, so I'm a bit quiet.
It's all right, no problem at all. Any idea what those holes are for? Let's ask an instructor. Put him on the spot.
Is it drainage?
Yeah, that's what I would go with.
I think the Robinson one's a drainage, but
Well, there's a hole there, isn't there, James?
Yeah.
Can you see daylight through that hole?
no.
Oh, you can. Yeah, there should be.
Can you?
Yeah, as in it goes into here, goes into the room.
I can't quite, but I'll take your word for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if
It
you
goes through.
you can actually
Oh, there you go.
it'll actually
That's
blow through.
definitive.
So there's a
Yeah.
little hole down there. But the other ones, it's
Is it
very
here in turn?
it's very, very complicated. It's so that when these are cast around these stainless steel strips, basically little pins sort of stick in to hold the stainless steel strips in place whilst all this is injected in there. That's why it just leaves holes. That's all, and there's no need to fill. And they're not special aerodynamic holes or drainage. They're purely to hold these straps inside. And these, I could put it in Dropbox. The shape of these, they go up inside in like a Christmas tree shape, like this. And this is all bonded onto, or it's all injected around it, composite material. There we go. Because people do ask us suddenly sometimes what the hole's for.
Now we know.
Any questions for that?
No.
For your Sprag clutch.
Oh yes, sorry, yeah.
This is a fantastic bit of kit.
Yeah. So what is a Sprag clutch? Well, let's everybody see this for a minute. What's a Sprag clutch?
Please for your auto rotation.
Yes, it helps facilitate auto rotation, doesn't it?
It's got
doesn't-
sprags on it.
It has. Good, Jonathan. What's a sprag?
It's a little thing that holds the drive shaft in place when the engine fails. Not the drive shaft, the crankshaft. One of the shafts, anyway. Remember which one.
Sort of along the right lines, but doesn't necessarily hold it in place. I mean, bearings normally hold shafts in place, don't they?
The centrifugal.
And spin around.
You old enough to remember the DAF car, where the way it would, the varimatic gearbox worked by centrifugal force, and it pushed. So when you change gear in a DAF 55, my grandmother gave me one when I was a kid. Then that's what used to happen, and
That's
so
right.
you relied on the centrifugal force to bond against the outside surface. And I think that's what the way that works, isn't it?
They were also they were variomatics. They had a belt that used to run up and down pulleys on them, so very clever. Yeah, I do.
I had a
remember.
maths teacher once had a DAF 66 who had that. We always used to take the piss out
Very
of him.
clever idea. Very, very sort of easy automatic or semi-automatic. If you spin that around, James. So, oops, let me just turn my camera around again. It's easy for me to see what I'm doing. This side, there's definitely a bearing, and so it looks like a shaft would sit in there. And sure enough, yes, a drive shaft passes through there.
Yeah,
no problems at all. But what we're really interested in is this side. Now you've got to imagine this sits in a pulley. You can't see this in full of oil as well. But this unit here, I'll tell you, if you pop that down, you should be able to pull. Yeah, you should be able to pull it out.
Ah, you can pull it out.
Yeah.
Now we're cooking with gas.
So we've got almost like the inside of a bearing race in here, nice smooth surface. What James has got in his hand, there we are, is all the sprags in this race. Now I can't easily take these out individually. I'm not going to try to, but just trying to imagine every single one of these little things here is a bit of an S shape. And what happens is when the shaft is through the middle of this, and don't forget this sits in this race as well, if you stroke them one way, they sort of lay down. And if you were to measure the width of them, the width reduces slightly. So in other words, if you've got a shaft going through here, they just lay down slightly and they don't grip on the shaft, i.e. allow it to overrun. But if you then turn it the other way, they rotate slightly, they expand almost and grip. So if you've got something through there, it grips it and holds onto it and the whole lot turns. So of course the drive belts, a little bit like this, go around a pulley with the kind of, it's not the right pulley, but it's good enough for this demonstration. So from the engine up to this upper pulley, imagine this as the upper sheave with the sprag clutch in the middle of it. And when the engine is turning the belts, turning the pulley rotates this in such a way that it grips on the drive shaft, and the drive shaft turns, main rotor gearbox, tail rotor gearbox, hey presto. If this lot suddenly stops, the shaft is allowed to carry on rotating around in there, i.e. allowing your main rotors and tail rotor gearboxes to carry on turning, which will, if we do the right things, auto-rotate. Ta-da! It's as simple as that. So the reason why we've got an elastic band round there, that's not normally part of it, is to pull them in so that I can actually put it back inside. If I don't put the elastic band around it, you can't put it back in because they've all popped out. So look, James, if you just take that band off, I'll try to put that in there now.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, anyway, you're going to have to rotate. No, you can't even rotate it.
You can't get it in there.
No, no, impossible.
So if I put in the band round, it just pulls them in slightly. And then we can assemble it again.
Funny enough, exactly the same technology in boat winches.
Yeah, quite possibly. Yeah, it's freewheel.
Exactly the same.
Freewheeling hubs on cars are very vaguely similar, although you can use bare rings themselves. But yeah, very simple. Simple as that. The thing, again, you wouldn't pick it up on an inspection, but the inside of these sprags is worn a little bit. So every now and then they'll drain the oil in that sprag unit, and if there's pieces of metal in there, it has to be taken apart and have a close look at. And the 44s went through a spell of having them being changed because obviously somebody must have had one lock up somewhere along the lines, and they did not a recall, but it was a case of right, they're all going to be inspected within the next 100 hours.
Yeah, when you close the throttle and part of your check, you are checking that this is able to freewheel.
That's right. You're checking all those sprags lay down slightly and allow the shaft to freely rotate, and then of course grip. There we go. And one of the things, when we're on that verge of auto rotation, that vibration you can hear is partly the sprag clutch just juddering a little bit on the shaft. That's why it's not always good to do that for prolonged periods, but it's also like backlashing the gearbox and all sorts. But yeah, it's potentially the drive shaft just jumping around slightly in there. All right. So while we're kind of vaguely in that area of sprag clutches and things, Does anybody want to tell me what that is?
It's a fuel distributor.
I think
No,
this gives it away.
it's not a fuel
You've seen this
distributor.
on the edge,
Yeah, you might have seen this bit before.
Come on, Ross, I'll show
Oh,
you.
yeah. That's the actuator, isn't it? That's
Yeah.
the actuator arm which pulls up the.
It's up this way, and you can just about see sometimes like that much of it looking from above. Or if you look from the other side, you might just about see some of the wiring and things. That's it.
That's the clutch actuator.
It is.
Yes.
That's on the 22 though, isn't it?
I didn't let you down, James. Didn't let you down.
Yeah, it's an ultra. I tell you, James, if you'd be kind enough,
Yeah,
if
of course.
you hold it up that way, just mind, because that one's particularly grubby.
Yeah, don't worry, I'm going to watch my hands
Oh, fine,
afterwards
okay.
anyway. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's where you got your down switch.
So for most people, this is a complete mystery how this works. So does anybody want to be brave enough and have a go at telling me how that works?
I'll let someone else. No, the see where James is holding it there. His left hand is on the actuator itself, so it pushes down. I can't really describe it. On his right, that's it. It pushes the whole thing down to tension the belts.
Oh, you sure you want to push down? Don't you want to move the pulleys away from one another to tension them?
That's what I thought. I thought it was spreading outwards. It's pushing down to tension the belts.
It pushes the pulleys away from each other to tension the belts.
Yes.
And there's an extra bracket on there too.
Oh, it's pulling up. Yes, it's pulling up to tension the
Off
belt.
the bottom here, this is attached to a unit where your lower pulley is, that one there. And it's pushing against it up to the top. And this is attached to your upper sheave bearing, the one that's got the teletemp on it, the one we keep a close eye on because it's under a lot of tension. And up here, therefore, you've got your drive shaft going to your upper pulley. So it pushes on this point here upwards, the upper pulley upwards to tension the belts via an electric motor that can wind one way to increase the tension. So in other words, you actually make this whole thing longer. You just about see where it separates, just there where it elongates. Now, at the moment, this is in a tension position, not a detension position.
Is that
so the
metal
motor
bracket as well? To design?
Inside here, there's a threaded area, and it just literally very slowly winds upwards off this shaft.
Yeah.
Now, that's simple because that's almost like worm and gear stuff kind of thing. Electric motor just winds it round. The clever bit is how does it know when to stop doing that when it's fully tensioned?
So that metal bracket, it's designed to hit something which turns the light off, doesn't it? That turns
the problem is these belts over time wear, which means they sit a bit further in the grooves of the pulley, which means they actually take more tensioning to get, or more stretching to get to the right tension, or more movement to get to the right tension. When they're new, it doesn't need to tension anywhere near as much. When they're new, they're also slightly springy or slightly stretchy. So the clutch has to retension several times. How on earth does this unit, which I'll be honest, does not look very sophisticated, it's got small micro switches on it. How on earth does that detect when there's that much tension on those double drive belts? So what James is pointing to here, again, it might not be desperately clear, but these are leaf springs. There's about 5 springs or 5 strips of metal in each one of those leaf springs. And up inside here, there's 2 micro switches. Now, at the moment, these springs are only just about touching the switches. They've not actually knocked them. So this whole unit is pretty much supported on these springs. You can see the top end of them up here, right the way down to here. And the idea is that that if you load this so much, these springs buckle outwards, they jump and they make a heck of a noise, like a loud
That's
clap.
what that noise is. Yes, that clunking sound.
That's it. Hit these micro switches, which cuts the power supply to the motor. But if the belt just stretches slightly, these springs jump back in, disengage or the micro switches, and off it goes again, powers the motor until they jump back out again. And so, yes, that's right. If you check the helicopter over and run the clutch mechanism without the engine running, you can hear all this lot whirring away, and very, very slowly you can see it moving just about, and the belts get tension. Eventually, you get an automatic brake clunk, and that's those springs leaping out, and it stops. And then when we slacken the clutch off, for a few seconds, nothing happens, as in the motor winds, and then you hear another clunk. That's the springs jumping back again. So that's what that noise is. So that is quite normal. If it doesn't make the noise, it's a problem. But you can't hear it when the engine's running, of course. Yeah, so really simple. Yeah, but this the strength of these springs, the position of them as well, on one thing or another, is set back at the factory. It has to be quite precise.
Oh.
Yeah, this we had had a brand new one of these put on his when I just had its 12 year done on it last October, but it wasn't working properly, so we actually had to put a second one on there, and the original one got sent back because there's nothing in here to adjust, as in the tension. Yeah, the only thing you can adjust is this screw, which determines how much it disengages by before it hits that micro switch to stop the clutch actuator, because the amount it disengages is about how much it slackens the belt off, and you measure that by any idea. So the adjustment on this screw here is all determined. No, it isn't. Funny enough, you'd think it would be, wouldn't you? You'd think it'd be how slack the belts are.
Yeah.
It's how quick they turn after engaging the clutch when their engine's running.
Of course it is. Yeah.
That's it.
Seconds.
So it's entirely determined by making sure the blades turn within 5 seconds. If your blades take longer, let's say they take 10 seconds, all that happens is this screw needs to be adjusted just a bit further down. So when it slackens off, it doesn't slacken off quite so much before it hits that micro switch. Now, that's not something you guys do, but you know how it works. It's a very simple thing to do, just to retension that, to adjust that. If it slackens off too much, potentially the belt allegedly could jump the pulley and be half on, half off, or one of the belts can jump the pulley, and that's not very good at all. You'll get belt failure for that, which is why we always check the belt sitting on the pulleys properly. But yeah, generally speaking, as long as that's tensioned correctly, as long as your blades are turning within 5 seconds of engaging the clutch, shouldn't have a problem.
Is this some sort of maximum over travel?
It is, yeah, because
far,
otherwise this mechanism can actually wind its way off the top. So this is another, like James said, if it keeps going, eventually it pulls on that micro switch and just cuts it out anyway. But by now you've got big problems.
Yeah.
Bearing in mind that's probably in the full tension position. It's still got quite a bit more to go.
Yeah.
But you can imagine if
it's a solid amount more.
If your belts are beginning to fail, it's going to try and give you everything it can to try and maintain that sort of tension on it, but without snapping them. But yeah, I think by then you've probably got big issues. That's it.
So Paul, if the blades take the 10 seconds, do we switch off and not go anywhere, or are you safe to fly?
The correct answer, Sue, is you would shut down.
Shut down. Yeah.
And that needs to be adjusted.
Yeah.
Because it's not that, oh dear, they took 10 seconds. It's there's a small possibility the drive belt could have jumped off the pulley slightly.
Gotcha.
And that there might have been in the past an accident that's been attributed to that very factor. The belts are too slack. It jumped off the pulley, halfway off the pulley, somewhere in flight the belt failed, and then there's a crash.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's it. I have seen them take sometimes up to 10 seconds. Never had a problem, but doesn't mean to say it wouldn't be a problem. And there's so many different factors as to how quick the blades can turn, like the belts themselves. The older belts, like the one I got on the table there, had a bit more grip to them, so they would tend to grip and turn the blades a lot quicker than the newer style belts, which almost have a slight greasy feel to them. They're a lot more gentle. So old 44s and 22s, old belts anyway, used to really squeak a lot when you engage the clutch mechanism when they're engaging, but nowadays they don't make anywhere near as much noise. They were almost like the Cabri belt.
So did it take how long before the blades turn?
5 seconds, no more than 5 seconds.
Okay.
If it was like 5.5 seconds, I think we can probably live with that. That's okay.
This is on a 22, not 44.
Both of them.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, both 22 and 44.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
I said there's a number of factors. If the belts are wet, they sometimes grip quite quickly. If you've just been flying it, they're quite hot and quite smooth. They might take a touch longer. If they engage very, very, very smoothly without any noise, they've probably got oil on them. And then I'll be more concerned with where the oils come from.
Right.
Yeah, I've had to shut down once on a helicopter. It wasn't mine, but somebody.
You told me about
I can't say who, but in case anybody knows, possibly the person, but somebody started a 44. It wasn't my one, and I was paying attention, but I wasn't doing the startup And I just suddenly thought, rotors are turning. I never heard those belts. They never made a noise. I said, shut down is a problem. What's up? What's up? I just shut down. And sure enough, belts are covered in oil. And so was a lot of the rest of the helicopter as well.
Flying without a dipstick.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Right. All right, looking good. Okay, how about this little fella here?
Yeah. Let's have a look at him.
I've cheated. James just looked. What is that?
Now that I've seen what it is, it definitely. You've seen it before,
And
all of you.
it's a bit stiff, but it moves. Look.
Oh yeah.
Is it a bleed nipple?
Oh, that's pretty good, Sue. That is not bad at all. That is not bad. There's a hole through it as well.
It's a self-sealing type
It is.
piece.
Yep, it's self-sealing.
Is it part of the fuel system on the Cabri?
Yes, it is. Yay, that's it.
Oh,
So it's a Cabri G2 fuel drain valve in the bottom of the tank. But the Robinson ones are very, very similar. They work on the same basis, that you just got a little sprung-loaded piston, and you can see, my phone won't quite focus on it properly, but there's a little black O-ring at the top that just seals it up when you take the pressure off. But any dirt sits under that O-ring, and of course it leaks, and we do have this problem sometimes with drain valves. You're doing all the right things. We're testing the fuel, so we're opening the drain valve, and a tiny little speck of dirt gets caught under the O-ring, and then it carries on leaking. So how do we clear that?
Press it again a few times.
Yeah, potentially. Sometimes you can do this. You press it multiple times with a bit of luck, you dislodged a bit of dirt.
Take it out.
But you can't. It's sitting in the bottom of the fuel tank, isn't it?
Of course, it's going to drain all the fuel.
Yeah, and it needs to be sealed in and all the rest of it.
So when you're draining when you're testing the fuel tank, is that what you push up?
That's it. You push that up from underneath on the Cabri. The Robinson ones, for instance, are horizontally mounted. But the gascolator's got something almost identical in it.
Right.
On all the helicopters. It's just a tiny little sprung-loaded valve. And they're not even as strong as this in the Robinsons. I don't recommend it, but the ones that got the pipe on them, you can use some very careful, very low pressure compressed air on the pipe, and then open the valve and you actually blow it back the other way, and it seals. You get rid of the speck of dirt that's trapped. Otherwise, you've had it. They just carry on leaking. But you can't go sticking a compressor on it. You'd have to get somebody who knows what they're doing to do it.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah, it's a little fuel valve, little fuel drain valve. All right, some nice easy ones then.
It's one of those ground screws that works very well in burst.
Yeah, it's nice. That's right, it's nice. Remember, all of these parts usually sit in a box under the table, all there for you to have a look at. And I've got plenty more. But yeah, any point in time, it's always good to have a little look. So what are these then?
They're rotor blade connecting rods or something.
Pitch links.
Yay, pitch links.
Pitch links, that's what I meant.
So when we're checking a helicopter over, what are we looking for?
Whether there's free play.
Yes, longitudinal free play. So James is trying to hold on to, pretending to be the bolts, through the silvery balls of these pitch links, these bits here, and he's going to try and pull on them in opposite directions to feel the free play. Now, we can easily do that when we've got them off the helicopter, and you can probably feel, the fraction of play that's in them, which is pretty much almost a zero tolerance. I can't remember how it's allowed to be, but almost to the point, if you can feel it, that's probably no good. Certainly if it goes clonk, clonk, clonk. Whereas the lateral play, if there's any lateral play across there, that's not a major problem. They do sometimes get lateral play. It's okay. It's the longitudinal.
Can't be excessive, though, can it?
But we were just discussing this earlier. Many people, just if you hold on to the silver parts, they do this, they go, oh yeah, that one's fine. And all you've done is twiddled it. You haven't actually checked the free play in it. So you've got to try and move the upper pitch horn, for instance, and the lower part of the swash plate opposite to one another to feel the play in them. And it isn't difficult. If you know what to do, it's really quite easy, but that's what you're after. You're checking how much free play is in these little silvery balls that are sit inside Teflon coated bearings. Simple as that. Otherwise, if they're older style, make sure the locking wires on, but the newer style don't have the locking wire on them. Or the jam nuts at the top, just make sure that they're been done up. But the newer style ones shouldn't be able to undo themselves, even if it was loose.
What did they change about the design?
Just the direction of thread, etc. Those sorts of things. Yeah, just to try and save on time, because the time it takes not so much to unlock it, but to relock it again. So they're
threading that through.
Yeah, so I mean, it doesn't take very long, but it's one of those. How can we reduce the maintenance times on things? Well, if we start to reduce the amount of wire locking required, over the life of the helicopter, you might reduce the maintenance by at least 10 minutes. All right.
Comes with a discount, doesn't it?
That's it.
It's cheap, yeah.
Okay. I don't necessarily expect anybody to guess or to know what these are necessarily from in this bag. I'm not going to get them all out. Any idea? There's one in
They look like bearings, but I don't know.
They are bearings, Alan. Yeah, spot on. They are. We're mucky anyway, so I might as well get them out. Yeah, sure enough. Look, they're just a fairly classic standard outer race, inner race ball bearing. There it is. What are they from?
Blades. Not the hub of the blades. Something like that.
Yes, good Sophie. More commonly known as spindle bearings. So these what? Spindle bearings.
Spindle. Oh.
Spindle. Spindle.
Okay, thank you.
And these sit inside the root of the main rotor blade. These are R22 ones. 44 ones are a bit bigger, and Cabri don't have any. And what happens, you can probably see on this race, can you see those funny little dark spots? That's where the bearings have actually pushed into the race. So one of these bearings has pushed so hard, because remember, this is a dismantled one. Look, here's the rest of it. It's all been dismantled. They've pushed so hard into the outer race, they've caused these marks. And they're actual dents. There's metal missing. And can anybody tell me what that's called? Brinelling a bearing. And it's I think it stems from it's a way of testing how hard something is, like a metal. You push a bearing into it with a certain amount of force, and the dent it makes, you measure the dent up, it's got a strength of via the Brinell scale, something along those lines. But we would say if a rotor's been oversped, the force on this particular bearing that we've got here, which is the one that's kind of holding the blades on in place, is so great. The bearings have pushed themselves into the race and actually damaged the race. What that transpires to, so it's a rotor overspeed, is that the bearings want to try and sit in that particular spot. And when you fly the helicopter like an R22, the cyclic will either judder a lot or it will try and sit in a certain position. I always tell the story, there was an old R22 who used to fly that, only a maintenance flight, to be honest, but it's owned by an old elderly chappie who probably wasn't always aware of the damage he was doing to his aircraft a lot of the time. And this thing wouldn't fly more than 70 knots. Not because it didn't have the power, but you couldn't physically push the cyclic beyond the point of trying to get the nose down. It was just too difficult because the bearings were so shot. Yeah, I dread to think what he used to do to that poor thing. That's it. It had many overspeeds. But there we are. And this, today, thankfully, is the only set of bearings, and it was both blades, I've ever had to have replaced in any of my Robinsons. So we've always been very, very careful not to overspeed them. But it takes about 6 months for all this to actually the damage to really manifest. You do one major overspeed and it's not obvious, but about 6 months down the line, these little pits,
it wears
it just keeps wearing, keeps eating away, and eventually gets to the point whereby it becomes noticeable in the cyclic. It starts to do this weird oscillation, or when they take the blades off, they can feel how notchy it is. So there we are, spindle bearings. And this is just one blade's worth.
So, Paul, did you say 1 overspeed leads to that in 6 months?
One decent overspeed of the rotors, yeah. Will lead to that. It takes about 6 months, roughly, depending on how many hours you fly. So for us, 6 months of flying, you know, say 3, 4, nearly 500 hours, that's when it manifests, yeah. But when you look at the math, the centrifugal force on the blades, if you were to take the rotors, whilst they're allowed to go up to 110%, if you calculate the force, it's horrific. The additional force that's applied. It's not just a little 10% more. To 110%, and you catch it and it comes back down. That is wearing these out rapidly. Now, it won't necessarily bring them like we've just seen, but it does wear those spindle bearings out quite quick. So you can always tell a Robinson that's had a lot of autos and a lot of, 110% RPMs. The cyclic's as rough as anything normally. So to sort of protect the machine and protect you, we try and not let it get that high, even though that is the upper limit. Right, what else have we got working our way down the table? Any idea what they are? Oh, it says on the packet. Oh, they're light.
Yeah, very light.
They're very light because they're made of an alloy, which is why they corrode.
Main rotor tips.
They are, yep.
Yeah.
Just main rotor tips of an R44. Now, these, thankfully, are not too expensive. So it's actually kind of more cost effective just to replace them. It is to have them repainted.
Really?
Yeah. Because they're probably, I don't know, let's just say they're sort of £300-400 to buy them. It's probably about almost the same to have them repainted, so you might as well just replace them.
Something like that would be 300 or 400.
I know, crazy, because it's not mass produced, is it?
Put that on a boat, it's 150. Put it on a house, it's like 30.
Yeah, it's not mass produced. So yeah, they're just rotor tip caps. I should hope everybody knows what this is.
Never pull down, it says.
It does indeed.
So
it's a rotor blade. Yay! It's a very old one. It's a very old style. But what's nice is we've cut it open so you can see inside it. So you can see how the blade is stuck together down the trailing edge. There's got this honeycomb that everybody's pushed, so you can't see the shape anymore. But this is just almost like tin foil in there, but in a honeycomb section. And then I can't really show you easily on my phone, but you can see in the office the skins are just bonded onto this leading edge, just there. That's literally where they're stuck. There's the bond line on both blades.
Oh, you can see it.
And you'll see it down this end because look, it's rubbed away. It's on the surface there.
Oh, there you go.
There we are. There's the bond line
Back to the
itself.
bond line.
And then what you can't normally see, this would have a tip cap on there, or the old ones. There's actually a flat plate on there. You've got already a weight in here that's already predetermined, but on these two holes here, this is where you'd have screws with washers on it that you would now balance the blades with. You'd either take or increase the washers in there to increase the mass of the blade. And one tiny little washer might only weigh, 1 gram, half a gram. That'll be sufficient to either make it in balance or out of balance, for instance. Because by the time that's spinning round, what's the tip doing? Best part of 500 mile an hour?
The R44 does 705 feet per second.
Yeah, it's quite fast. So it equates to somewhere at about 500 mile an hour, just give or take a bit. Always sounds impressive when you say that. I think it's actually a bit less, about 475, 480.
I have extrapolated it before.
But it's about 500 mile an hour. So the tiniest bit of weight on there makes a difference. So it would be true to say, because you do sometimes hear people say, oh yeah, if you stick a postage stamp on the tip of your blade, it'll put it out of balance. It's true. It would. You wouldn't necessarily feel it, but it would put it out of balance. But we do notice if your blades get dirty, especially in summertime when all the squash bugs and everything get on there, they do fly slightly rougher. You clean them all off and they'll fly smoother if they've been properly balanced in the first place. Yeah, it is. You do notice it.
Mess with your lamina alone.
Yeah. Now Robinson changed both the style the shape and the makeup of these blades a few times. They went from things like stainless steel skins, I think that's a stainless steel one, to alley skins and various things. They kept going backwards and forwards. But if I'm getting around the right way, the stainless steel skins were much thinner than the alley ones, and so far more prone to being dented accidentally. So I bought on a helicopter, I bought once an R44. Somebody had new blades put on it, but when they're putting them on to support them, it looks like I used a broom handle, and it literally dented both the blades. It was within limits, thankfully, but both blades have got dent marks on them, and it's classic broom handle to support the blades when they're being put on.
So those would have been very low now, actually. They are.
But they had quite big. They had big weights in them.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
same sort of.
yeah. That's it.
They're symmetrical, aren't they, Paul?
Yes, they are. Yep.
Hmm.
Yep. Of course, they're classed as asymmetrical, but yeah, that's right. Yeah, there's no lift generating section on a Robinson blade. So if you truly got zero pitch, that's it. All that it is chopped through the air. But the blades got twists, so they do have already a degree of positive pitch on them already, which is why when you run a Robinson, underneath it, there's a tiny bit of downwash. It's nothing much. And the Cabri has got a lift generating section. So it is the shape of like a wing of a plane, the Cabri ones. So they do generate a bit of lift. But ironically, underneath them, you don't really feel it.
No.
When you get underneath the rotor disc.
Don't feel anything.
No. Either that, the sheer fright just stops us from feeling it.
Mustn't jump in
as
fear.
we duck down. No, don't jump up because the Cabri blade's quite low. They're only barely about 7 foot.
Yeah. If you're vertically challenged like me.
Yeah, they're fine. They're fine for James and I. But if you're a tall person, tall instructor in the Cabri, yeah, you need to be careful. All right, we're getting there.
Sorry, what's the honeycomb actually for? I mean, the strength isn't enough.
The strength, yeah.
It is.
It's just purely, that's right, lightweight, but the strength keeping those two skins apart and in their correct shape. But notice it doesn't go down. It doesn't go right the way down to the back end. Look, and the front spar's hollow, stainless steel leading edge. No, so alley's leading edge on these. Just a quick trivia question. So Chinook blade, made in a very, very similar way. What do you think they use for this strengthening, this supporting honeycombs stuff? What material?
Space, it's like Nomex or something.
James has gone for some sort of Nomex, sort of, Kevlar. Anybody else?
Is it wood? Is it something ridiculous like wood?
You're not far off.
Titanium.
Paper. Apparently, they are paper inside.
Joking.
Nope.
I was going to say egg box.
One hopes they're quite well sealed up from the elements.
Yeah.
Don't go soggy inside. But yeah, apparently.
Can't fly in the rainbow.
Listen, don't. If this is not true, don't shoot me. But I am told that they are, and I when I went to Odium a few years back, the engineers agreed, said yes, it was paper inside.
But Chinook blades are huge. They must be
I know,
all
they're
paper.
massive. They're like the width of James's shoulders.
Yeah.
Thank you. Is it compressed? Presumably it's compressed paper, at least into some sort of...
No, it's standing upright, into that sort of shape, into that honeycomb shape.
Really?
Yes.
Just sheets of paper?
Yeah.
It's
It's like toilet rolls, isn't it? If you put, 4 or 5 toilet rolls down and put a board on top of them, you can stand on it. It's like that. Lightweight.
Our Elstree blades failed an NDT because there were some cavities inside the blades. Is that some sort of they said they found some cavities inside the structure.
Oh, cavity.
Cavity.
Cabbage. I was like, what?
Oh dear. Did you say that's your Elstree, Tim?
It's a sort of cavity. That's what they said. They failed on.
Ah.
I'm not sure how they're made. That's the thing. I know they're different.
Don't know about Elstree blades. Yeah, they might be made out of cabbages.
Oh, it might be made out of cabbages. New laws with cabbages.
That one looks like a Kit Kat to me.
yeah, doesn't it? Mashed up one. So everybody's prodded it with their finger. So might have to cut it again. A nice clean break on it. Right. Okay. Moving swiftly on from cabbages. we're still in sort of the loosely sticking the blade section. How about this then? Yeah, you need some scale on that bolt, James.
Okay, of course.
Sotheby's.
A decent old bolt.
If you've done your age check right, you'll recognise it immediately.
What do we reckon?
Come on, Ross, I've made you check these.
I mean, it's nearly the width of James's wrist.
It's almost a foot, isn't it? It's almost a foot.
I was wondering where you were going to put that just then. It's not that sort of ground still, James.
Lonely.
Lonely nights.
Come on, what?
God, blimey, I thought everybody
recognise
did.
it. I can't think where I've seen it.
Go on, Ross.
Well, I've seen it. I recognise it.
You have seen
What
it.
you'll have seen is maybe this end
Or the other end.
or that end, and probably with something through it, like a
Yeah.
split pin.
Yeah, I can't think. I can't remember.
The main rotor bolt. It's an R44 one. The R2, I did have an R22 one
It's
actually.
a Jesus bolt.
It is a Jesus bolt. And why do they call it a Jesus bolt?
I thought the Jesus bolt was the teeter bolt.
It is basically. Yeah. That's a teeter bolt. They're all- yeah,
Is it?
yeah.
Okay.
Because if it comes undone, you say, "Oh Jesus!" Yeah, it's what's holding on either the blades or the hub onto the mast. One big bolt. It's a decent sized bolt. Don't worry, it isn't going to break.
Big and solid.
But I tell you, now you've seen it. The next time you go flying, for us instructors, we got the little window above our heads. We sort of look up through the window, look at the rotor, and think, "Bloody hell, it's just that one bolt." Everything's hanging off that one bolt.
This keeps us alive.
And like I say, the 22 bolt's about the width of it's about the width of your thumb. It's a bit smaller.
Ordinary gearbox forces the lift
Yeah, that's
a
right.
ton on that.
Yeah, incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it's a very, very, very strong bolt.
Yeah.
I'm told, not that I've actually seen them, but the bolts that hold engines onto things like big, airliners are tiny because they're wedges. They hold the wedge in place.
Ah.
It's very cleverly done. A bit like the Cabri rotor head.
Yeah, I mean, this is heavy.
That's heavy duty. That is passing through the hub, the mast. Boom. There it is. And then it'll have has Teflon bearings that sit here and here as well. So it teeters on those, for instance, and that's where you can see the slight rod marks on it. There we go. Right. What should we have next, James?
I think some of these.
Oh, hold on. We'll have that with that.
Okay.
I tried the.
There was a right answer, though.
There was a right answer. Yeah. It wasn't. We're saving that till the end.
I like those because you can break car windows with those.
That's it. Right. What have we got here then? How about this?
It's the window. What I
Fuel
put was-
sensor.
even makes the right noise.
I thought it was the electric window motor mechanism.
It's a cyclic stick force spring.
Yeah.
Are you serious?
I don't know. I thought it was.
It's a fuel sender, isn't it?
It is a fuel sender. Yeah. So that end there, that's
That's
a
what
float.
you get in your car.
That's a float, and inside that little housing is really a very simple variable resistor that a little
That's a
little
potentiometer
arm is.
or something.
Yeah, it's just rubbing on. That's it.
Yeah, it's
Simple as that.
twisting a potentiometer.
That's upside down, by the way.
Is it?
That's better. That's
Yeah,
it.
that would make more sense. wouldn't
That's
it?
what I meant to say. It just
That's
came out. I think.
They're really simple. Look, there's just one connector on it, just there. That's insulated. So there's your live coming from your light bulb. From your gauge, and just gets earthed out by the unit, etc. And yeah, just rubs on a little. You can hear it squeaking away. Just rubs on a little potentiometer inside. Ta-da! Makes the gauge read something. And if you ever, I can't remember how to do it now. Oh, I thought one of these, this is a long time ago, back up at Cranfield, you could actually, one of these wasn't necessarily working properly, but these get dead spots. So to check it, got the fuel tester and just pushed down on there or lifted it up. Hey, there we are, the gauge jumps into life and there's a dead spot. And of course, they quite often wear out somewhere around the middle area because that's where it gets used the most. So it's not uncommon for, although to be fair, I haven't seen it for a long time, but it's not uncommon for things like an aircraft that has a fuel sender like this to be okay, not okay, then okay again, depending on where that sits in the tank.
Yeah.
Then you kind of get used to it.
That's for most of its time and sort of that.
And so I seem to remember flying something in the past where around about mid-fuel, the gauges would hit zero. It'd be like, yeah, don't worry, it's all right. It'll come back in a minute.
Don't worry.
You see these sort of frightened passengers or students, like, what? Are you serious? Yeah, honestly, it'd be fine. But look, just rock the aircraft bit there. See, look, they're working now. You hear the horror stories, like John tells us. Oh, yeah, they never work. You just dip the tanks. The gauges never work.
Yeah.
Don't worry about the gauges.
Just fixed them. Don't worry about the gauges, they don't work.
Yeah, it's fine. It's got fuel when we checked it.
Just put in what you're going to use.
I tested James earlier. This is a really complicated one to try and work out. Does anybody want to have a go? Oh, I might say about the packet's reflecting.
Makes anyone feel better I didn't get a Ludo.
Anybody want to have a go at what this is? There could be a Christmas bonus available here. It's up that way, I think. Yeah. Oops, try to not get the light shine off it.
It's a correlator.
He's seen it before. How do you know that? How have you worked that out?
Well done, John.
Thank you.
How did you get that?
I think I must have seen it before.
It's top marks. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's the cam that the throttle would run around, the linkage. So as you lift and lower the collective, it moves around this slot and increases or decreases the throttle accordingly. But that's why you've got that big jump at the bottom. It's true. If you've got the RPM quite low, as you lift the lever, the throttle quickly moves around there and opens quite quickly. But notice, it's not a linear shape, is it? It's interesting to see. You'd just assume that as you raise the collective, it will just open up the throttle by the same amount. Yeah, there's a little wiggle in the middle. Yeah, it's quite impressive.
On the 22?
No, this is the Cabri G2. So you just lost the bonus there, Jonathan.
Oh, yeah, open my big mouth.
Yeah, the R22 doesn't have one of these. It's just a linkage.
Just a mechanical
a link, okay. not a cam.
Right.
That explains a lot, actually.
Yes. But the R22 and then the 44 one works better than the Cabri one, even though it's a purposely made shaped cam. But it's done in such a way as we know that, roughly speaking, if you raise the collective, it's the same amount of throttle you have to open each time per collective movement.
Yeah.
There's no dead spots, there's no nothing. It's always the same. As you raise the collective open, as you lower the collective, close it in a Cabri. Whereas in a Robinson, over a given range, it works really well. But it's just, as far as I remember, it's just a link. I don't think they've got a cam in there of any way, shape or form. It's just a link between the two. That's got a little clutch mechanism on it.
So how does the D10 disable this then?
It's just the throttle linkage is sort of sprung loaded, so you just wind it back into that area. Yeah, it doesn't remove it from this or anything. This still operates. It just now doesn't allow the push rod to move the throttle linkage. I don't expect anybody to get this. It's actually the exhaust gas temperature probe on a Cabri, which they've now doing away with. We'll just have the software update done on the screens. All right, how about this one then? This is a slightly tricky one. It's got a plug. Only 2 connectors on it, or 2 pins inside the connector, I should say. Looks like a motor. It's got some sort of like a mini pitch link, yeah. James, see if you can move that in. See if you can move that around. Yeah, just move that around a little bit. You should be able to.
Should I?
Yeah. It's quite tight.
Yeah. If I force it.
So it does take nearly all of his strength, but he can.
There's not much of it though.
He can move that round without moving the motor. So something slips, like the mechanism. What can that often be described as? It's gripping, but it's slipping. What in their cars sometimes grips and slips? Yay! So that's some sort of little clutching mechanism on that unit.
Oh, it is done by just a little bit of fabric in there.
Yeah.
So the clutch tensioner.
It's not the clutch tensioner. No, we've already had that. That's over there. That's the clutch unit. This is something different. It's got an electric motor with some sort of like a cam and arm with a little pitch link of some description. But that lot can slip round if it needs to.
Not the governor, is it?
Hey,
He's on fire.
yeah, Jonathan, you are on fire, my friend. All that
Yeah.
ground school paid off, didn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's. I think it's I think it was. I think it's actually 44. Just trying to remember now. One was slightly lazy.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's a 44 governor motor, and that ability that James is to turn that part is where you can override the governor by twisting the throttle, for instance. So you just mechanically start to just override it.
Yeah, you've got an arm on it.
And the tension on here is actually preset, but you can't, not we can't, but you can adjust that, the amount of tension that's on there. So I have had them in the past where the throttle is way too loose. You know, you can override the governor very easily. It's like, no, that needs tightening up. So that can be tightened up to the right sort of tension. So it mustn't be too tight, so you can't override it, but you don't want it too loose. So as the slightest, you grip a little bit of tension on the throttle and you'll just override it. So it's got to have exactly the right amount of friction in there. But there it is. Very simple. Because that's not the entire governor, is it? You've got a control unit that's missing. So you've got a simple box of tricks with a control unit in there that's going to tell that to either wind the motor one way or the other to operate that. But there we are. That's a good one. Right, what else we got? How about this?
Two ends.
None of you would, unless you've seen, like in my box of bits, nobody would have probably ever seen one of these.
There is a bit of a
Giveaway.
A giveaway on that particular sticker, so I shall turn it around.
Does say in and out.
It does.
And those red things are just blanking caps, by the way. Clearly a motor.
Not a fuel pump, is it?
It is a fuel pump, Alan. Very good. What from, though, Alan?
Well, I would say it's from a Cabri because it's an electrical fuel pump.
Yeah, you would think so, wouldn't you? But it isn't, alas. So this fuel pump looks quite meaty. Looks like it probably puts out quite a lot of pressure, whereas the lifter pump in a Cabri fuel tank only puts out, what, about 0.4 of a bar? So about 5, 6 psi.
44. Is it from a 44?
It is from a 44. Jonathan again. Jonathan, if you're coming to the quiz night, you're on my team, okay?
All right, cheers. I'm there.
It is. It's the often known as the auxiliary fuel pump. It is actually the main fuel pump on a 44, despite the term auxiliary, which sometimes we always think is like a second or secondary of some description, but it's actually the main one. So it's the one if you fly Raven 2s, when you prime the engine and turn the key to the prime position, you hear the pump. It's that pump squirting fuel into the induction system. And then when you start a Raven 2, you don't actually run it on this during the start. It's only when you then engage the clutch. Yeah. So your Raven 2 runs initially on the mechanical pump of the engine, which is why you always know the mechanical pump works, because it ran. And then when you engage the clutch switch, this one starts to work, and this one puts out a little bit more pressure. So the pressure switch knocks out the auxiliary pump light. So if this pump fails, the pressure drops slightly and the light comes on. So yes, the auxiliary pump light is just purely on the pressure switch.
What does it put out in terms of pressure?
Oh,
to compare
God,
it to,
I can't remember. What would it put out?
I mean, you could look it up.
Oh, I'd have to be guessing a little bit because it's an old style system. 5 to 10 bar, I should think. I guess.
Significantly.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, significantly more.
Significantly.
Yes, it's got to push it through injectors that only break at a certain pressure before they'll spray pattern. Yeah, and it's got to be a fine mist they're spraying, so it's got to be under quite a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
Nothing compared to what modern cars do, though.
No,
the injection pump on model cars, yeah, potentially if you put your hand in the way of an injector would
go in.
Potentially put a hole through your hand, for instance.
Really
Have
bad.
you seen high pressure cutters?
No.
Liquid.
Oh, like sand.
No, just through can be gas. It's coming out.
Boats we used to use sand ones.
Okay,
and
so
you cut through stuff with just incredibly high pressure sand
that's it.
and water.
Yeah, you can have air, water, all sorts of things.
Yeah.
Amazing, but yeah, they don't put out that much. But there we go. Auxiliary fuel pump from an R44.
Yeah.
One of these. It's quite big.
Starter motor.
Oh, you got
yeah,
it.
that's a nice easy one.
Seen this one.
You see that all the time. And one of the things we should check about a starter motor is that the mounting bolts, you know, the nuts that are around here are actually in place. They're holding it on. I've never found one loose, but I have heard of somebody once finding one loose. Not good. That's a big old lump to fall off your helicopter from under the engine.
That's going to hurt.
And it's got a little geared motor on it as well, and the Bendix. That's it. So you can pull that out. There we go.
That's what happens when you engage. That comes
That's
out
it.
and starts spinning.
That's it. So it throws that into the ring gear of the engine and cranks it over. So this
one looks like it's quite beaten up actually.
It's not too bad.
It's quite a lot.
I've seen a lot worse. So this is a solenoid that when we put a little electric current to that terminal, then makes the solenoid activate, pushes is it push or pull? Pulls a metal rod in there because it's an electromagnet, which also then makes a big power connection from the battery, then jumps across into powers the starter motor. This week, put the screwdriver across potentially. Yeah, that's it. But you have to you put it from here to here, for instance. There's a little arm in there, seesaws, like you just saw James, throws that sprocket out into the ring gear, and of course you've just powered the motor, so turns it and away you go. Brum, with a bit of luck. Now, does anybody want to tell me something interesting about maybe the Raven 2 starter motor? If you look, this is a Raven 2 one.
Interesting.
Raven 2 is, of course, the 24 volts, and the starter motor spins around a lot quicker, which means it's much easier to burn out.
Which is why they have the start limitations.
Yeah, that's it. Basically, you've got kind of like 3 goes of 5 seconds, then you have to walk away for a bit and let it all cool down because it just gets way too hot and you burn them out very easily. Whereas the 12-volt systems are a lot better, as long as you don't. Sometimes you crank the engine over and it almost gets stuck. You need to let go of the key if it gets stuck, because otherwise you'll potentially damage the starter motor because all the energy you're putting through it is not turning. You'll burn the armature out inside. But otherwise, they're quite fairly bomb-proof, the 12-volt ones. But this is a 24-volt one that probably no doubt got burnt out from somebody's helicopter. Don't think it's one of mine. Okay. Just a section of tear the drive shaft off the Jet Ranger. And one of the things that we're looking for when we're inspecting it, again, is not going to be easy to see. Might be the other end's better. But this flange, this yoke flange, is bonded onto the shaft, and just there where that pen mark is, it's just beginning to delaminate. It's very, very, very slight, but it's both ends. This end as well is doing it. So on this old style shaft, you've got these weird little things down here, look. And these spin round. It's like a pin going through the shaft. Any idea what that could be for? Now, you don't come across this in your Robinsons or your Capris or anything, but we do. This is an old style drive shaft, but we do have these on the Jet Ranger, maybe on the horizontal stabilizer. I don't think we've got anybody on board at the moment that flies a Jet Ranger on Zoom tonight, but these are deliberately loose so that if you can rotate it, the flange clearly hasn't started to move on the shaft because it goes right the way through. If this pin suddenly goes tight, we know that flange, that yoke flange, is shifted on the shaft. It's pinched it, and that's a no-fly for obvious reasons.
Yes.
And we have them on the horizontal stabilizer, don't we? There's bolts that go through the horizontal stabilizer, and you can turn them on the Jet Ranger to show it hasn't had any undue stress on it. Right, we're nearly there. We've been saving this bit. Anybody know what these are?
Spark plug.
Yeah, spark plugs.
Car braking kit.
Yeah, yeah, they made it. Yeah, these are very, very hard metal, so you can actually break windows with them. Not you should try that, by the way. And so you can see the center electrode there. That's where, from your magneto, is supplied down through the insulation of the spark plug, down to that little bit there, and jumps across. The tiny, these are really small compared to cars. The gap between that electrode and the earth on the outside is tiny. But there we are, that's what's going to ignite your fuel and air mixture. Now, if you excessively flood a Robinson or a Cabri potentially, you can actually get lead on these from the fuel. Yeah.
Leaded fuel.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it'll run rough until you finally get it hot and you'll melt the lead and away you go again.
I used to clean my old motorbikes, but every now and then get them out.
And I have actually seen this. I did what was it? Track and balance, I think it was, on an R22, and I got told to keep priming it every time to start it, even though it's a hot engine. And eventually, it started to run rough. And they thought, it's got sticking valves now. They took all the rocker covers off, checked the valve, checked the valves. No, they're all free. What's going on? And it was the plugs. It just literally got lead, and there were lumps of lead in there, little baubles of lead, and started earthing them out. So naturally, it just ran a bit rough. Cleaned them off, and hey presto, it's all back to normal again. Just from over priming.
Lead, it makes sense.
Yeah. So what is this? It is. And what are these?
Piston rings.
They are. Now there's 3 rings. I don't know if you can see that. The 2 top ones look very, very similar, but the bottom one is definitely different. It's distinctly different, isn't it? Yeah, that's all the deposit from the fuel. So why is this bottom ring so different from the top rings? Now, this bottom ring, you can't see it so easily, but it's actually got slits through it.
Oh, yeah, you can.
I can get my fingernail in there, and actually we could, pass a fluid through it, for instance.
You've given it all in there.
Yeah.
Oh.
So what is that ring there?
It's the fluid is making it a seal, yeah. So when the fluid goes into it, it seals it.
No, it's not. Yeah, it's not that.
Okay.
It's known as an oil scraper ring because up the top end, inside the cylinder, we'll see in a minute, is where the combustion all takes place. So the top 2 rings help seal that combustion into the cylinder. But a bottom ring, well, underneath there, we need some oil to lubricate this piston, but we don't really want the oil to go into the cylinder and burn. So you have a ring that, as the piston goes back down, it scrapes inside the cylinder, and any oil potentially manages to go through these gaps because it then can go actually inside the piston. So this has got holes in it and back into the engine, into the sump of the engine. So they're known as oil scraper rings. But if you wear these out, you might be able to see it a little bit better this way around. You can just about see those slots in it all the way around.
I see them.
If you wear these oil scraper rings, guess what happens?
You get the blue smoke.
You get a very oil burning engine, and blue smoke in cars and those sorts of things. Yeah, that's it. So if we look after how we run these engines in and protect this oil scraper ring, potentially your Lycoming air-cooled engine won't use too much oil. And a good R44, if you get a good one, will use roughly 1 quart of oil in, say, 10 hours. If you get a dodgy one, every hour you'll be topping up with oil. And, oops, bear with me, sorry. Oh, yeah, so I just got to remind everybody about the quiz night. So in 2 weeks' time, don't forget quiz night down the pub. I've just had a very...
Which pub?
And it's just down the road, just south of Radlett. Everybody should, everybody should get a reminder about it. But do need to let us know if you want to join in.
Is the one we went to last time for Christmas a few years ago?
We have been there before.
Potion Horses, is it or something?
It's the Wagon and Horses.
The Wagon and Horses, that's it.
It's south of Radlett.
Yeah.
But you should all get a reminder about that. So do let us know if you want to join in. It'd be great. Yeah. Never know. Some of this stuff might come up in the quiz. Hey. So anyway, so a dodgy engine, roughly 1 quart an hour because that oil scraper ring's been worn out. It's not been looked after. And weirdly enough, on engines, the the more you run it low on oil and poor quality oil on the rest of it, the more this wears. The more this wears, the more oil it burns, which means the less oil you have, which means it runs low on oil, which makes this wear out more. And it becomes a vicious circle. So every time you run an engine low on oil, and if it's dirty, poor quality oil, it gets worse and worse. There we go. Right. So what is this thing then? Apart from heavy and messy. Actually, it's not too bad.
It's a carburettor.
It's a very big carburettor, isn't it? Well, funny enough, look, that looks like it could fit inside. It won't because the rings are getting in the way, but it would fit inside.
Oh, it's a piston, is it? Piston housing.
That's the piston. Oh, in case you ever get
cylinder.
The thing across the middle is the gudgeon pin. That's the gudgeon pin. Goes right the way across, but then it's connected to your con rod.
Yes.
Goes around here. Yeah, this is the cylinder. Now, on most car engines, the cylinder is all part and parcel of the block of the engine. But on these sorts of air-cooled engines, it's bolted on separately. On car engines, the top part, known as the cylinder head, is separate, but on these, it's not. It's all one big cast, as you can see. So it's quite dark up there, but you can just about make out the valves and the spark plugs either side. I can't. If I can turn my light on when this is on, no, I can't. Hey, there we go. Thanks, James. Inside, spark plug down the bottom and up the top. Now there's two. I can't open and close them because they're under very high tension springs. But there's two valves. But one is bigger than the other.
Inlet and exhaust, is it?
So yeah, oh, excellent. And the inlet valve should be the bigger one, and the exhaust valve the smaller one, because the inlet gases in these engines are being sucked in, whereas the exhaust gases are under a lot of pressure being blown out. They don't necessarily quite such a big aperture to get the same quality out, kind of thing. Now this board, notice, look, can you see all this brown stuff in here? It's rust. Rusted.
So has that had water in the?
That's just literally the moisture, so that's been in the classroom and all the rest of it.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Because these are just basic. Yeah, they're basic cast iron. Yeah, absolutely. And of course, where the piston's been rubbed up and down inside there, it's just literally straightforward raw metal, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it corroded. And this is what can happen to engines if they sit for any length of time and not been preserved correctly. They literally get rusty bores, which is obviously very bad. Very, very bad. Low compression, massive oil burning and all sorts. So yeah, this is why you during lockdown it's advisable to run the engines at least once a month and for a good hour. It's not just to start up for 5 or 10 minutes, which is actually work for it. You've got to get the engine right up to temperature and get the oil hot to get all the moisture out of it before you shut down again. If it's going to be shut down for any longer periods, potentially you would have to remove the spark plugs and put blanks in there that've got like silica gel in them to absorb moisture out of the cylinders. Otherwise, they'll corrode like this. Yeah, like a rusty nail.
It's very pronounced.
Because our helis thankfully shouldn't have any of this because they run nearly every single day. But yeah, you see some of the other aircraft maybe on the airfield that sit 6 months.
You could have owner aircraft.
Yep.
Easily.
Yep. Right. Every 6 months. It won't necessarily be as bad as this cylinder, but it won't be very good. Because what's a byproduct of burning fuel, combustion?
Water. Partially.
That's it. Bit of water, yeah, absolutely.
Get it going out the exhaust pipe, don't you, in the morning?
That's right, yeah, exactly. Yep. You see lots of water vapor. So yeah, every time you run an engine, and it's one of the reasons why we shut down by cutting the fuel supply.
So it's all gone.
Yeah. So the engine stops without fuel being or unburnt fuel in there, for instance, all those sorts of things, without combustion in there. Whereas if you shut it down electronically, potentially you'd leave some sort of combustion in there, which could have a tiny bit of moisture, which will rust the cylinders if it's left for any length of time. So yeah, all fuel mixture. Cool. So hopefully everybody understands why this has got all these kind of like fins on it.
Heat transfer.
Oh, say that again.
Heat transfer.
Yes, good. That's it. Yep, the cooling fins. Yep, that's it. So they allow that heat that's being generated inside that cylinder from the combustion to have air blown under, hence air cooled, and that air gets blown from the cooling fan over these cylinders and downwards out the bottom of the helicopter usually, which is why it burns the grass underneath when we land for any length of time. It's the heat coming off the cylinders. And then we can see, known as ports, the inlet port, so that's where your fuel and air mixture is going in through that valve, and the exhaust port where it's coming back out again and being blown out down the exhaust system. And these valves, here they are, they've got these things called, I haven't got it on this cylinder, but they've got these things called rocker arms that teeter over here, that push down on the valves and open and close them. So down this end, you've got push rods. If you've ever heard of a bent push rod, it's these things here. So then go back in the engine to a camshaft that will then make them move up and down and open and close these valves. So when we, in Lycoming engines, when we land, do we immediately just shut them down or do we do something first?
We cool below 350.
Yeah, so what are we actually cooling down?
The engine block.
Well, you'd think so, wouldn't you? It's actually these. So here,
Temperature.
this is where your temperature probe goes, and you're measuring your temperature just via that one spot. I don't think these are double if I'm not. No, they're only single. So just one spot it's measuring from. And what we're trying to cool down is the really, really hot parts, which are things like the exhaust valves down in there, because they run incredibly hot. They're sitting in gases that have been operating at 800 odd degrees or more. So they're really, really hot. And bearing in mind that at the upper end of them over here, we've got oil trickling around this area, and there's going to be heat transfer through that valve. So if you shut them down too quick, that high valve is really hot. You'll get heat transferring through up in this area. Yep, and the oil burns inside there and it sticks. Yeah. And you'll end up with sticking valves. So it's really important we try and cool this area down and get rid of some of that heat. And we do that just by sitting there with it idling at a, say, depending which helicopter you're in, 75% maybe, for instance, just to try and get that fan to try and cool this area down. That's the really important area. So we don't get sticking valves, which then bend push rods, and then you have a cylinder that doesn't work properly. Cool. Oh, I'll do sideways for a minute. Any questions or any of that?
No.
Very good.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
22.
I forgot the clocks up there. And of course, they said, don't forget, we've got all these parts here, and there's got even more parts in the cave. I tell you, one of the bits I wanted to get out that we put away was a piece of the tinware of the engine with fractures in it. So you can see where the metal's actually fractured. And what would cause that, do you think? So the metal I'm talking about, it's not structural. I've got one tiny bit here. Looks a bit like this sort of thing. It's quite flimsy. But what do you think would cause fractures in this sort of metal?
Is it vibration or heat?
Yeah, vibration in particular.
So hard landing.
No, not so hard landing, because this is just metal work around the engine.
Oh, okay.
Oh, there we are. James just found. Yeah, this one is actually fractured. Look. Let's see.
See it?
It's actually split.
Is that from the rotor overspeed or something?
No, it's just vibration from the engine. So there's certain RPMs that the engine harmonizes and vibrates more and resonates and makes these metals resonate, and it fractures them. And this is why we're always trying to, wherever possible, ironically, avoid running something like an R44 at 75%, because it doesn't like it. You can hear it vibrating in the aircraft, and it fractures the metal, and we end up having to have all these sorts of bits replaced as a net result. But I say ironically because, of course, that's where we're meant to do our magneto check. If we're doing that, we're just trying to limit the length of time. Whereas the R22 doesn't do it as much. It's not a problem, and the Cabri doesn't seem to do it either. It's all carbon fibre around there anyway.
The 44 has a Lycoming engine as well, does it?
It does indeed, yes, but it's a 6-cylinder. And like I said, 75% most R44s. It vibrates like fury. You can hear it in the back of the engine and the tail cone.
Right.
So when we try to minimise the length of time we do that.
It doesn't contribute to ground resonance, does it?
No. You can't get ground resonance in a 2-bladed rotor system.
Oh, you can't?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, in rotor system, it's got to be at least 3 blades or more.
Right.
A fully articulated rotor system.
I see. Okay.
Cool. Well, if nobody else has got any other questions, we're going to
I've got one for you, Paul. On the R22, if you look underneath it from the pilot side, the back, there's a box, and I asked about 3 or 4 people what it was, and eventually one of the engineers said, "I think that box has something to do with a shower of sparks."
Ah, yes, it's in my other box. I've got one of those. Yeah, it's a shower of sparks. If it's got a black plastic cover,
yeah,
with I think it's 2 electrical connections underneath it.
Yeah, quite small ones as well. It's not a thick piece.
Yeah. No, it doesn't need to be particularly big. Yep, that's your shower of sparks. So it's a capacitor, really, basically, isn't it? That is going to send a load of sparks down through the right magneto for when you're starting the engine.
But isn't it? The guy that explained to me says something about that it increases the amount of time in the stroke, but you actually get the chance to make an ignition. So
yes, yeah. So because of course, if the magnetos are turning slowly, i.e., you're cranking the engine over, they're not really turning fast enough to generate enough electricity to create a decent spark. So you have the shower of sparks that will electronically do it for you via the battery, that will then go into the magneto and be distributed via the magneto. But yes, you're right, they're distributed a little bit retarded, so the engine doesn't kick back on itself, so it becomes a little bit easier to start. So yeah, if you pulled the plug out of that shower of sparks, it's almost impossible to start the engine because it won't start on the magnetos.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Vital. Totally vital.
I have had it before now on an R22. 22 is normally good as gold at starting. You're cranking over and it's not a sign of life. There could actually be that the left magneto points have gone on it as well. But I've had it before. You wiggle the connection on the shower of sparks, you try it again, boom, away it goes. As you say, the connectors are not great. So it's only a little spade connector. It's quite poor on it. Gets soaked in oil and all sorts. But yep, that's all that is, shower of spark. Very good. All right, well, I'm going to say good night to everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
My pleasure.
And good night.
Thanks very much again, Paul.
Thanks, James.
Cheers,
Don't be
guys.
afraid.
Bye.
You can look at these
Yeah,
parts,
everyone.
yeah?